This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there. Been a while, hasn't it? Now, I could sit here and I could make excuses, and you could believe me because of how sincere I sound and what a nice guy I am. But truth of the matter is, I have a lot on my plate, and when I am filling in for my friend Bill on his radio show, it's enough of an investment of time and effort and mental and moral energy that this is one of the things that I say, yeah, that one can go on the back burner. So it's not that I don't have things that I want to share with you. It's just well, here comes the first excuse. I'm getting older, and sometimes I have to prioritize. So I make the best use of my time, but I do miss the opportunity I have to jump back behind the microphone for my very own show and put some information and content out there that hopefully is helpful and will help you better understand the world as well as better understand yourself. So, that said, I'm going to say thank you to all of the kind souls who wished me a happy birthday a couple days ago. Crossed the threshold of 59. I'm now pushing up against 60. I can't believe it. I mean, it's unreal. And I take it as a huge compliment. My daughter was saying, Dad, my friend is really freaked out. She cannot believe you're the age that you are. She says, you look like you're a lot younger. And what can I say? I guess it's just all that good, clean living, or maybe I just was genetically inheriting a baby face. It's funny. I see it in my son, David. He's always kind of had a baby face, and he turns 24 a week from tomorrow. And his size, he's a big boy. He's 6'3", and I don't know how much he weighs, but he's a good-sized man, but he still has kind of a baby face. And, that's something I had to deal with for a long time. I left to serve a mission for my church when I was 20 years old. And people would tease me, and I kind of, yeah, it's funny. But inside, when they would tell me, well, don't come back looking like you're 14 years old. I look back at the pictures now, and I think, my gosh, there was some truth to it. I compare, pictures of me when I was, 20 versus, say, my grandpa when he was 20. I don't know. The real dip in testosterone, and I mean society-wide, is something that's happened primarily within about the last 20 years. But what a difference. I just look at those. I think they were rougher times for family members back then. I think they grew up under, in some ways, what's the old saying? In some ways, they didn't have as much money, but they were richer. And they may have been poorer, but they were also wealthier in many ways too, in terms of the freedoms that they enjoyed and the relationships that they enjoyed. So at any rate, here I am, raring to go and moving into my 60th year of existence. And I'm really excited for the coming year, not necessarily politically, although I see some pretty positive signs that, there could be some very serious cuts in government waste, and just business as usual doesn't appear like it's going to be the thing. At least that's the talk on the street, and that's actually encouraging. But as I've counseled before, don't put your hopes that, now that Trump's been elected, why, and when he's in office here in another, month and a week, it's gonna change everything for us. I want to believe that there's potential for some great change. I don't know, though, that I don't know what obstacles are going to come up. We're still kind of knocking on the door of World War III. Economically, things are not great. And I don't say this to discourage anybody, but just to point out, unforeseen circumstances can and will come up. And we've got to be flexible enough and hopefully prepared enough, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, emotionally, to roll with those punches and to be able to move forward and persevere, as is the mark of Americans and others who are pioneers in their own time. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about a couple of things here. I'm going to start with this one just because this one really grabbed me. Fathers, make your families happy. This is an article from Walker Larson. I picked this up off intellectualtakeout.org. And this one was on my mind. Fatherhood has been on my mind a lot because on my birthday, I had a chance to talk to my daughter who is in Germany, and it's been a long time. She hasn't been over to the States in about 5 years. We've been over to Germany. I've been over there twice. I think my wife's been over at least 3 times since then. And it's been tough. We miss her so much. And she's very homesick because of the holidays. And I'll tell you, as a father, that conversation with her was one of the most important parts of my week. And in particular, as I was talking with her, I felt the gravity of what it means to be a dad and to be what I hope is a loving, good father to her and to the rest of my kids. And here's the kicker, and this was part of our conversation. I know dang well that I have made so many mistakes along the way in how I raised my kids. Just as a dad and as an individual, there's times I've screwed up, and one of the times I actually talked about this with her. I just said, this has been on my mind. It's haunted me. And she was young, I'm guessing 2, maybe 3 years old. We were on a trip visiting family, and long story short, she had an accident in her pants. And she had tried to ask us, I have to go to the bathroom, please let me go. And we were, I was saying in particular, oh, just hold on, we'll be home in a little bit. We'll be back, to the house in a little bit. But she couldn't wait. And I'm probably the only person who's ever made this mistake, but it just really upset me. And I yelled at her. Yep, 2, 3-year-old daughter. I yelled at her for having an accident. And I still remember the pain in her eyes as I yelled at her after not believing her, or at least not heeding her when she said, she needed to go. And I talked about that with her, and I said, I need you to know that that is something that has come back to me more than once over the years. And it's like a punch in the stomach to remember that I could be that selfish. And to her credit, she said, Dad, I don't remember this. I don't remember any of it. Thank you for apologizing. I forgive you, but I really don't remember. And then she said, that makes me want to be careful with my kids and how I talk to them. And I share this because it's an example of, look, there's not a parent out there that hasn't been frustrated. And there's times, my sister told me this once, she goes, there's times where you just find yourself yelling at your kid, not because you think it's the right thing to do. You know it's wrong, even as you're doing it, but you do it because it just feels good to let that frustration out. And somewhere in our minds we get it, that's the pecking order, you're the kid, you have to take this because I'm the parent and I know what's best. So when I saw Walker Larson's article about making your family as happy as possible, it's not in an indulgent or an overly indulgent sense. He says, would a father who's focused only on making his family happy be an overly indulgent one? No. Well, the answer, he says, depends on both the definition of happiness as well as the method by which the father promotes that happiness. We've all observed fathers who cannot stand the sight of their children's tears and cave to any demands in the name of keeping their wife and children happy. And by contrast, most of us have also seen fathers who prize order, discipline, and respect for his authority. So it might be easy at first glance to assume that, well, those fathers have opposite parenting goals, but a closer look, he says, reveals that the two dads might not substantially differ in what they desire for their families. It's in how far ahead they look and how deeply they penetrate into the mysteries of human nature. That's where you find the difference. A good father, in the end, desires only his family's happiness, but the right kind, in the right way and over the right time frame. So let's look first at the overly indulgent father, suffering from short-sightedness and a false understanding of human nature, assuming that his indulgent behavior is something more than a mask for a selfishness incapable of tolerating unpleasant pushback. He imagines that the look of delight flowering on a child's face when they receive yet another cookie expresses true happiness. And his work then becomes a matter of busying himself, accumulating such delights as cookies and juice and later cars and cell phones for his children. But Walker Larson points out this kind of happiness is strenuously attained, tenuously maintained, and jealously guarded in a vault of material goods and wealth. The father labors lest the happiness, that's in quotation marks, run dry, thus more trips and video games for the kids, more clothes and furniture for the wife. This is why fathers and husbands become addicted to work, even when it absents them from the home for long periods of time. If happiness is, after all, a long inhalation of pleasures, then a father's job is to keep them coming, to prevent the drink of life from running dry. And having sacrificed much for the comfort of his family, such a man experiences bewilderment when he finds he's a mere vagrant to his wife and children who seem increasingly troubled, rebellious, and unhappy. So was he strong to aim at happiness for his family? He knows something's gone wrong, he just doesn't know what. His children seem emotionally and intellectually absent, attention locked on the phones he bought them, only coming alive around their friends or when posing for social media. He's vaguely aware that they're not telling him things, that they're involved in activities online and in the real world that aren't wholesome, yet he doesn't know how to correct it. After all, they're just seeking happiness in the way that he taught them. See, the reality is that they've received too much happiness, is not that they've received too much happiness, rather, but they've received too little. They're overfed but undernourished. They asked him for bread and he's given them a serpent. Ooh, that scripture kind of takes on a new meaning, doesn't it? The father in this story misunderstood happiness because he misunderstood humanity. And Walker Larson says, it's true that we're made for happiness, but we mistake what brings happiness in the long run. And I love here, he actually leans on Aristotle for some clarity. In the beginning of the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle deftly dismisses pleasure, wealth, and honor as the real causes of human happiness. All of these, which have seduced so many millions of people, do not bring real happiness, he says. Instead, he shows that human nature's distinct quality is rationality, and in fulfilling this rational nature by acting reasonably, we fulfill our purpose and find happiness. So let's put this in other words. For Aristotle, this reasonableness is equal to virtue. In other words, virtue is how we achieve happiness. In the philosopher's own words from book 1, chapter 13, happiness is an activity of soul in accordance with perfect virtue. So as it turns out, our hypothetical rule-enforcing father has the same problem as his overindulgent counterpart, happiness for his family. But here's where they differ. He is more far-sighted, recognizing that patterns of self-indulgence, however pleasant at the moment, tell a story of tragedy over time. He understands virtue is necessary to overcome tragedy because only virtue is ultimately comic despite life circumstances. Only through learning, self-restraint, and virtue can you live a successful, happy, and fulfilling life. The father and the mother bear the responsibility to instill virtue in their kids from the earliest years because something in our nature continuously diverts us into the ruts of selfishness and instant gratification. Here's another way of saying that. Toddlers don't teach themselves self-control. So a good father disciplines because he loves and desires happiness for his sons and his daughters. But that road too has its own perils. And Walker Larson says the stricter father can lose sight of the goal of his actions as easily as the overindulgent one. Rule following can become an end in itself or the result of a fear-based reaction to life's danger and challenges. Rather than a means to fuller living and joy, it becomes a scrupulous flight from evil. Worse yet, some fathers set up their own authority, discipline, and well-ordered life like a golden calf before which their households must bow down. And this confusion of means and ends can crush children's souls as the joy of life seeps away like water in a drought. So in short, he's saying fathers need to aim to make their families happy, remembering what true happiness means. Yet fathers and husbands mustn't neglect the little ways of spending short-term joy or spreading short-term joy and happiness, so long as the long-term happiness isn't hazarded in the process. A smile, a joke, an unexpected treat for the kids, or a bouquet for the wife. Yep, those are examples of short-term happiness. And rising above all these points is the consideration that fathers and husbands have to aim to be happy themselves if they want to impart joy to their families, both in the big picture sense of living out a virtuous and self-restraining life, and in the specific sense of making an effort in the little things, practicing indomitable daily cheerfulness. That's hard. And he says the road is by no means an easy one, but that's why it takes a real man to be a good father and husband. Now, I don't want to sit here and act like, well, I'm just going to beat myself up for all the mistakes that I made. I know I made them. I hope I've learned from them. I know my kids have, in that I don't see them making a lot of the same mistakes that I made. But there's a few things I've done right along the way. For instance, the fact that my kids actually enjoy listening to Steely Dan, I take that as a really good sign that, yeah, it wasn't all bad. It's great music. The fact that we have humor and inside jokes and one well-placed quote from The Simpsons, generally seasons 1 through, say, 12, is enough to set my kids off on a whole flurry of quotes from The Simpsons. So there are a few things we share, inside jokes and things that they remember that I've forgotten. But I love that they love to laugh. Yes, our sense of humor is sometimes wildly inappropriate. And I have to take credit for contributing to that inappropriate sense of humor. But at the same time, it also brings us closer. And so, in that regard, it's a family tradition. By the way, my oldest grandson, he's 7 years old, and his sense of humor runs toward the inappropriate too. And I don't just mean potty humor. I mean, he's got kind of a warped little sense of humor, and man, I just love him for it. All right, let me shift gears. 2 other articles I wanted to point your attention to. If you value food freedom, if it's not on your radar screen, just hang on. It's going to be sometime soon. The USDA is now ordering nationwide testing of milk for bird flu. And you may think, well, this is just about trying to, keep us safe from, what is it, N5N1? I think it's H5N1. Nonetheless, I don't think that's the only place that they're aiming right now. Now, I've heard talk that, well, there's, ducks across the area that are testing positive for bird flu, or avian flu, I guess is what they're calling it. H5N1 in cows, though, is something that was first detected in milk back in March of this year. And federal regulators have started raising concerns. Oh, it's spreading quickly. There's been very few cases of humans contracting the disease. I don't think there's been any fatalities. 58 cases so far reported by the CDC, each person recovered in full. But I worry that this is going to open the door to demanding things like, well, if you keep backyard chickens, you're going to need a license for that because we need to know that you have them. We need to test them on a regular basis. And look, if you have a milk cow, we want to test that too. Government wants to be more involved in anything related to your home food production, especially as it applies to small livestock. I mean, having a dairy is one thing, and dairy farmers definitely need to be on the lookout for diseases that could travel rapidly through an entire herd of several thousand cows. You wouldn't believe the size of the dairies in the area where I live. But this also leads to a crackdown on people's ability to produce their own food, as well as their access to things like raw milk. You realize this is why the Amish turned out in incredibly huge numbers in this year's election. I think in 2020, if I'm reading correctly, in Pennsylvania, the Amish turned out roughly 3,000 voters in the 2020 election. This year, it was something like 180,000 individuals who are Amish registered to vote and voted. In fact, they're one of the reasons why Pennsylvania swung to Trump in this year's election. It wasn't just Trump that brought them out, though. It was the fact that they have been targeted over and over by the Food and Drug Administration and also by their state health experts or their state food quality assurance experts, and they come in and they've confiscated meat and they've confiscated milk and they've confiscated cheese and just, arrested, sent like SWAT teams to go conduct these raids on these farms. I know that heavy hand is supposed to be there to protect us, but did we not learn a few things from the COVID incident? I mean, the congressional report has been out now for a couple of weeks, and there are only a few things that they really don't come out and strongly condemn, the vaccine itself being one of them. But pretty much everything else pertaining to lockdowns, masks, the targeted essential, non-essential businesses and so forth. This congressional subcommittee says we got it all wrong. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm just telling you that this is vindication for those who were saying, hey, I don't think this is right. You were correct. Take a victory lap if you want, but you were correct. The problem is there are still people in power, and there's still people who will misuse that power, as we're seeing with this apparent quest to protect us, that's in air quotes, from bird flu. Interesting times. I'm not telling you be afraid. I'm just saying be aware. Last but not least, I am not an expert on cryptocurrency, but I followed Paul Rosenberg long enough that I consider him a trustworthy, credible source of information. And he has a great article about Bitcoin specifically, about how Bitcoin fixes this. That's a common refrain that you hear. Sometimes it's used well, sometimes less so, but he says, I'm very serious when I say that Bitcoin fixes society. And he walks you through in this article. This is actually the article of the day that I'm sharing in today's show notes, which you can access at thebryanhydeshow.com. He says, Bitcoin changes the incentives that have distorted the shape of modern society. And this is possible because the world's present incentives have mainly been set with money. By changing the world's money, we also change its incentives and the world overall. And he says that process may not be fast or easy, it may not be pristine, but the principle remains true. You change the incentives, you change the world. And he walks you through some of the most obvious things that need to be changed. War, welfare, public corruption. He walks through how Bitcoin fixes society in those ways. And the first thing he says that it would do is it would massively diminish war, the robbing of Peter to pay Paul, and corruption in government. I'll let him explain to you how that would work, but it does make sense. He says the study of money above all, he's actually quoting economist John Kenneth Galbraith in saying this, the study of money above all other fields in economics is one in which complexity is used to disguise truth or to evade truth, not to reveal it. Think about that every time the Federal Reserve chairman or chairperson comes out and makes a comment. It's always cloaked in some arcane language, and it's a word salad that Kamala would be proud of. But it doesn't tell us much. And the point here that Paul is making is once that changes, once money is comprehensible and honest, a large portion of the confusion surrounding us will fade away, and with it a whole range of persistent human errors. Now, a Bitcoin regime, he says, would still encompass flaws, abuses, and stupidities, of course. Those will be with us at least until we ourselves improve, but it would not fund them, and more importantly, it would not defend them. So yes, he says a Bitcoin economy will fix society deeply and enduringly, and he says laboring for this is one of the noblest efforts of our time. Some great food for thought from someone who actually, I think, does some very serious thinking. Check it out. It's in my show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com. These are the show notes for December 12th, 2024. 12/12/2024. If you're looking for it, again, thebryanhydeshow.com. Hey, great to be back in the saddle. Let's talk again tomorrow.
This is The Bryan Hyde Show.